Okay. Welcome, everyone. This is Nanette Kennedy with Humanities Team and Evolution Revolution. This is our weekly uh, Neil Donald Walsh book discussion group. We are nearing the end of Conversations with God, Book 3. And, excuse me. And last week, Linda read chapter 20, did a beautiful, beautiful job. And we ended like at the same time the phone call was to end. I think we talked for just a few minutes. So we just wanted to talk about other things that are going on in the book. And I actually did have time to skim the chapter again before this call. And I just wondered if anybody wants to bring anything up right now, go ahead and then I'll add in.
Alton here, I just got, simply blessed by listening to Deepak Chopra live. God, that guy is just an incarnate master. Holy. Anyway, he was live here in BC Pacific time from just an hour before we're now conversing about CWG, and he made the most amazing point that just turned on a light bulb for me. Maybe you folks have known it forever. It was about self-image, and Deepak said, just keep in mind that we're not talking about the self-image of your ego. We're not talking about the self-image that comes through your personality, how you're raised, peers, societal raising, your own conclusions you came to in the midst of all that. He said, we're talking about the core self that is love. So get past the ego self-image. Oh, I'm working on my self-image. Oh, I'm positivizing my self-image. That only works for a little while, right? So anyway, putting into context with Conversations with God, I could say anything truthful, and that would be in context with Conversations with God. But basically, tuning to the soul, getting through the conscious mind, the ego-based mind, the little I am, and bridging to your soul where you feel the bliss, you feel the love, where, that's where your self-image comes from, because you are the image of self, to put it in a pretty godlike way. Thanks for listening and sharing. I hope that was meaningful to you.
You're muted, Nanette.
Love it when that happens. Anyway, I think Linda just joined us, and we're discussing chapter 20. And because we didn't have time to really go too deep into the conversation. Anybody else want to add anything at the moment? Okay, well, I'm going to bring up a couple things. This is a couple pages in, 3-4 pages in. And I'm not going to give you a page number because we've all got different books. But it's where Neil is asking God about who was Jesus' father. Yes, but who is said to have conceived him? And Neil says, I don't know what to believe about that. And he says, well, if Mary was visited by an archangel, from where do you imagine that angel would come? From heaven. Did you say from the heavens? I said from heaven. From another realm, from God. And did we not just agree that God is a spaceman? God says. Neil says, not exactly. We agreed that God is everything, and that since spacemen are part of everything, God is a spaceman in the same sense that God is us, all of us. God is everything. God is the collective. Now, just before we started the recording, we were talking about all the things that have happened in the last week around the world, and Europe, Middle East, United States. And I was mentioning that I was listening to NPR, and everybody's so appalled in the U.S. about this white nationalism business that's occurring. Well, most of us. And one of the things I thought about was they played a recording of God, my brain, George W. Bush Jr. And he was talking right after the 9/11 event here. And I was not a huge George Bush fan, but I would take him in a millisecond at this juncture. And they played the speech that he gave soon after 9/11. And the NPR people were saying, now listen to him. He comes off in a kind of a fatherly way. He comes off in a way that is trying to keep people calm and not divided. And he's speaking about the Muslims that, we can't hate people just because of their religious beliefs or the way they dress or this, that, and the other thing. And there's no reason for us to fear the Muslims that live in the U.S. And I thought, how is it that a guy that I thought I didn't like a whole lot can come from his heart like that, and we have this other guy here now in the presidential office that doesn't, I don't know if conversations with God would make any difference to Mr. Trump, but what I was getting to here is where Neil says, you're playing with words now. And God says, I'm doing the best I can. I'm using words in spite of their awful limitations to get us as close as I can to an idea, a concept of things, which in truth cannot be described in the limited vocabulary of your language. And that made me think about Donald Trump not having any kind of filter. He just doesn't have a filter. He just does these things without thinking. At least I hope that's the case. And I was thinking about how we can get, it's by our behavior that people are going to try to live as best they can as we do. And this limited vocabulary thing, this is like a stream of consciousness chat we're having here because it keeps reminding me of other things. I'm not sure if everyone here has kids, but I know that feeling where there are no words, and that's when you give birth or hold an adopted child for the first time. There are no words. There just aren't any words for that. And I'm gonna leave it at that for a minute. See if anybody wants to add anything.
I love how you note stream of consciousness, Nanette, because isn't that who and what we are in a big picture sort of way, but putting into context with what you were just saying. Stream of consciousness, lovely expression.
Thank you.
I think this is just a side note about our president right now. I actually think that it isn't even so much that he doesn't have a filter. I think, I think he's genuinely surprised by what happened in Boston, because I think he has surrounded himself predominantly with people who represent what went on in Charlottesville. And he thinks that those are actually the majority of the people in the country. He doesn't know our Constitution. He really doesn't know what the rules are. He's grown up with an attitude of entitlement and specialness. So he just bullies his way through life. He's done that since he was a kid. And so I really think when I look at the eclipse and this energy and all this stuff that's happening, there really is like an opportunity for an awakening here, for him to realize, gee, I ran my whole campaign thinking that, that these people were the people that I was serving, when in fact they're a minority, and if I serve them, I end up looking bad. Maybe he will wake up to the rest of us. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to give up hope, but I really
can you
think
back
he's
up and
quite
tell
surprised.
us about Boston? Because I haven't watched the news.
Okay, well, so Boston, there was an alt-right rally planned at I forget the name of the park now. Was it Boston Commons even, maybe? And they had a permit, and they were calling it a free speech rally, but it was a free hate speech rally is what it was. And so Boston turned out about 20,000 people in protest. They started at like the other end of town or something, and they marched across town to meet at this park where the other people had their permit. But the alt-right people, only 20 to 40 people showed up. And they were so outnumbered that they didn't even bother doing their speeches. They just kind of packed up and left. And I think the cops actually helped them leave safely because they were so outnumbered. Like 20 to 40 was the head count versus about 20,000 people.
Well, that is
inspiring. Beautiful.
Yeah, it is.
It was beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. And, I've been saying, yeah, protest, but don't confront them. Like, stay away from them. Ignore them. But in the end, this actually was even better. They didn't ignore them because they marched to them. But there were so many of them by the time they got there.
Well, that gives me hope because, well, it just gives me hope that for all the things you've already said, it's that's a very hopeful turnout.
Yeah.
And it speaks volumes.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've just been putting energy into him resigning based on the realization that he really doesn't understand who the people are that he represents. Because there's really a drumbeat for him to resign. There's really a very strong drumbeat for him to resign.
May I add something?
Sure.
This is what we discussed last week is the story of my life, where God's saying, think outside the box, that it can be both. I've grown up in very polarized places. I'm Pakistani, so there was a war with India. Then my dad worked in the Middle East, so there was a war with Israel. Then I lived in New Brunswick, Canada, where all the Christian sects hated each other with such passion. that it made the Pakistanis and Indians and the Arabs and Israelis look like nothing. Just the hatred between the Pentecostals and the Catholics and the rest of them was so bad in a country that is peaceful. What we're talking about essentially is what Nanette said, is that you have to listen to NPR because everything else is just conservative, super right wing, that you got to tune into something different, that it doesn't suit your mindset. And now what Linda's mentioned is that the Trump hate speech people were a maximum of 20 as opposed to 20,000.
Mm-hmm.
So in mystical terms, what we're talking about is vibrations and essentially radio stations. Is in essence, we don't even have to pray or send Donald Trump, I think it's 45 that they call him. We don't even have to send him, energy to quit. He's just going to be wiped away the way the Boston people were. Is that the wave is a tsunami now, that all the other radio stations can blast as much as they like, but the overwhelming story is like what Alton said, love rules. Or like the Rastafarians say, one love. End of story. That you just cannot fight this. That's the core, that's the glue that binds the universes. That's the only radio station. That's it.
Mm-hmm. That's a very good analogy.
Beautiful, Shabana.
Thank you.
And, it occurs to me while you were, making that analogy that I've always believed in my heart, which I'm sure most of us do here, that because when my kids in their, 20s and 30s now, but when they come to me and they say, they're afraid of the future and what it'll hold and what it'll bring. And I've always said this. I've said, there are far more many people that are good, that would do the right thing in the right moment. And I don't mean like right and wrong the way Neil talks about it, but just most of us, if we saw a child fall into a swimming pool, we wouldn't ask questions, we'd jump in the pool. I think that is our true nature. And yes, there are those that might not. But I have to believe, so that I'm not in a doom and gloom situation 24/7, that most people are good. And there's a line that Neil uses in some of his books, and I'm going to butcher it, but it's people react to things given the way they see the world. And if you live in fear, constant fear, you're going to do things that you might not necessarily do. And Sarah adds, it's so relevant to what Shabana says. As Linda says, we have to believe in change. In Scotland, we have had a massive increase in tolerance in 50 years for religious, sexual, and ethnic differences, from bigotry and repression to becoming one of the more inclusive countries. There is further to go, but we can achieve so much. And that's really uplifting to hear. We've got to come together. And It's the golden rule that I think is it, and it's in every philosophy, religion. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And if we really lived that way, well, we wouldn't be having what happened in Spain, Finland, Charlottesville, and other places around the world. I am trying, and I want you guys to talk about this with me. You get up on a daily basis, and there is some sort of tragic happening on some place in the planet. And I'm kind of getting to a point where I'm like, this is probably what I say. Oh my God, when is it going to stop? And then I go about my day. I mean, I think about it off and on, but it happens so often, it's becoming regular. Over.
Well, yeah.
May I just add something very quickly, Linda, if you'll forgive me?
Sure, go.
Okay, I'll be quick. In the problem, the solution is contained, Nanette. And the people who are acting out, because that's what they're doing, they're just spreading their own inner landscape into the outer world. But heaven lies within,
Mm-hmm.
and so does the hot place, which is why they're putting these bombs out. So those are the people who will do the most to bring us together, as Donald Trump is doing. And that's all. But I think they're beacons of light because they're such black holes that people rush in to do the opposite.
That's a good point. It's a very good point.
Yeah, and I think part of part of our experience as Americans is that for the most part, even though we could identify there were things that were not right or needed addressing or needed fixing, for the most part, as Americans, we've come to expect that things will just move along and that we'll evolve and that these problems will get taken care of. And what's happened is that we've entered this stage now where to recover to that place of feeling like when you got up in the morning, you were in a pretty safe place. Yes, there were problems, but you were in a pretty safe place and it was running itself, and there were people in control who had their wits about them and who understood our Constitution and our Bill of Rights and our Declaration of Independence and understood our country. And like with a flip of a switch, although it took a good 2 years for this to happen, but it feels like a flip of a switch, because the minute that we woke up on January 22nd, I think it was this year, after 24 hours, we already knew we were in for some kind of wild ride. And there's no going back now to it. Okay, I'm getting an echo. There it went away. So part of that, I think, is what we're experiencing and what you're talking to, Nanette, is this feeling of, I just want to wake up in the morning and just be able to go about my business and not worry about what the hell's happening in our country. But I don't want to sound extreme, but I actually think we're in a 30 to 50 year phase now before we get to feel that way again. Because what's happened is we've revealed this cancer that's been spreading in our country. And interestingly enough, I don't think it's just limited to white supremacists. They're what has our attention at the moment, but I just happened to stumble across this picture of a bunch of white, they're Christian conservatives, supposedly, but they are as much a part of this hate movement without even realizing it. They're a part of this hate movement. And so in the end, I think it's a bigger issue. It's a bigger cancer than we realized. Yeah, we can maybe beat back the obvious white supremacists that aren't wearing hoods anymore. But there's a whole bunch of these people that, and there's way more of them, that have this twisted notion of what Christianity means, what conservative Christianity means. And with that agenda that we're also having to deal with. So, it all comes back to there is no them. Each of us is the universe, and each of us must be the change we wish to see in the universe. And that's how we get out of this mess. I'm done. Thank you.
Many good points. And one of the things I just want to add is that, again, I was listening to NPR, and I believe it was in Germany. They have somebody that they're calling like Trump Jr., who's running for chancellor. And Germany's not having much to do with it. I mean, they're like, this is not going to happen. We see what's going on across the pond, and it's just no. They're just say no, as I think it was Barbara Bush used to say, just say no, or it might have been Nancy Reagan, who knows. But I think that Trump is a good mirror for the rest of the world to say, that's what we don't want. And people from other countries can work from there. Anybody else?
Yeah, I have something to say, and I'll try to be as quick as possible. We, all 7 of us on this call, are reading out loud and putting out the vibration, which is God speaking to humanity through Neil. And he's saying what all of humanity needs to hear. So this broadcast is part of the huge tsunami of love, because it's an intentional community, and God knows that the truth here is absolutely powerful.
Amen.
And we're united in this intention, which makes it that much more powerful than the whining and polarization that needs to be loved into wholeness.
It was beautiful.
Beautiful.
Yep, that was beautiful. And it brings me to one of the things I was going to mention. And I don't remember exactly where it is in here, but we've all read it enough, where God says, excuse me, God says, there's no right or wrong the way you look at it. I mean, the way you've taught yourself to look at it. And he talks about, highly evolved beings not wearing clothing and not doing this, and a lot of things they wouldn't even consider. And so in the highly evolved beings, which I would say, Linda, we're the 20,000 that showed up, to say this is not happening, or I don't know what it was. It was a big statement from what you were telling us. And then I think of when Neil says, what's the purpose of all these souls from other realms? And Neil answers, to save our souls. He says, in a sense, yes, but not from everlasting damnation. And I think, Lindsay, did you just bring up the conservative Christians? Or I don't even remember who said it.
Yeah.
Okay. We had a program this week for Humanities Team as a Reverend Howard Caesar with Unity Church, and he's been a Unity pastor for like 33 or 35 years, something like that. And his whole thing is, he believes in Christianity, but not the Christianity where you say, well, you say you're a Christian, but you don't want to feed the hungry, help the poor. You don't want anybody to get raises, because they're of this conservative bent. And yet we have, what happens to me when those things occur, and I can remember Sarah Palin doing this, where she said she goes to church every Sunday and prays for the poor and does this, that, and the other thing. And if nothing was an action, and there's nothing wrong with praying, so don't misunderstand me. But Monday, you hear her talking about how when she was going to become vice president, we were really going to tighten the reins on helping the hungry, the poor, because then they never learned to do for themselves. I'm thinking, disconnect. I don't get it. And I think, well, what if you're calling yourself a Christian, how Christ-like is that? Not very. And that's me being judgmental, but I see what I see.
I think, again, is that, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, awesome. God says in CWG that the soul realm, the spiritual realm, is all bliss, all oneness. And so Big G and us and we co-creators with the goddess are creating positive and negative, the two contextual fields, the diametric opposites, the Christ being and the Hitler figure. And in understanding how humanity by the millions followed Brother Hitler's, oh my God, that takes courage for me to say that, because we are all one. Because Hitler was an essential, important energy. We could have avoided it. We could have just relied on memory. We didn't have to go there, but we did. So in the contextual field of that polar opposite, we also understand the fullness of the Christ, the fullness of oneness of being. Allah be praised, Buddha be loved, etc., etc. The whole, everything is one. So even politics is not an answer. Politics, the medical system, all of our basic systems, as expressed clearly in CWG and in my own experience, which is far more important because I'm going to live from my experience, my understanding, is we've been betrayed by greed and corporate profit systems that have gotten into government. I heard a powerful statement calling the North America, or what is it? There's a certain model of medicine, right? The one that Western civilization has bought into totally. It's basically disease treating. It's sickness medicine. Anyway, blah, blah, blah. The forces of profit and greed have gotten into all of the systems. So CWG and my heart says we have to change the systems. Thank you so much for listening. Love you all. You're just so awesome. Anyway, concluding here is, it's beyond politics. I just pray for all these political figures. I happen to be a Canadian, and so what? What we're really focusing on is one world, one love, right? I happen to be a Mayflower descendant, which, pre-ancestralized by bloodline, the whole, well, settlement of America, and the original settlers were peaceful. The Indians helped save their lives. It's the Pilgrim story, right? Anyway, yeah. So we're all one, and it's about the oneness. And oh God, I have to say it with power and love, and not the oneness. We're good. We're making it good. It's all good. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you. A little while ago I said something. Sarah just wrote this in and said that I had said something earlier about Trump getting the CWG messages. What do all of us think if we could do more to get the message out? For example, a massive launch of Book One into areas of our countries at one time that we all take part in. Most people I meet still have not heard of CWG. And I think it's a great idea. I know not everybody could. I don't know what is wrong with my voice today. We could all get together on a specific day. We can do the Awakening Day, which is the 12th of every month. But give time for people to purchase the book. Now, I wouldn't give away my book because I write in my books, so that won't happen. But I think it's a really good idea if we can afford at least one, if not more, books. And leave them in places. Anybody else have thoughts on that?
Can I jump in? Because I have some interesting thoughts.
Sure.
I discovered, some of you may know about it, it's online, internet based. It's called thriftbooks.com would be their web address, Thrift Books. And you get an account and la-di-da, and when you buy $50 worth of used, recycled, repurposed, but still pure when you get the right books, haha. Thrift Books. Free shipping in the United States for any order over $10, which is, in my case, I'm very thrifty, and I could get maybe 3 books for that $10. Free shipping in the States for orders over $10, blah, 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 millions of books. In my last checking, there were over 200 used copies of Conversations with God, Book One, in the thrift store, shopping area. And it's cool. They're internet connected with various bookstores and or warehouses across the state. So I have ordered, say, 10 copies of CWG Book One, and they've come from perhaps Virginia, perhaps Pittsburgh, or Washington. Okay, cutting it to the chase, though, you can get a copy of CWG for about, I think it's in the $3.50 to $4 range, hardcover in great shape, through Thrift Books, and they have about over 200 available for order purchase. So there's my best contribution to pursuing that idea that Sarah shared, that Net has developed and we're all thinking about.
I think that's a great idea, and I can't believe that there wouldn't be used bookstores in other countries if it's too expensive to have them shipped from here. But I would say that that's a really good idea, is to go to, and it's probably not the only used bookstore on the planet that's online. So I really thank you for that, Alton. That was really good. And thank you, Sarah, for bringing that up, because when we've done this, what was the first book we read? I can't even think of the name of it right now. But What God Wants You to Know. Or no, is that it? Looking for it on my messy desk, which is not going to happen during this phone call. But I think if we were to do what we did with this Book of Meals, It's God's Message to the World. This is the first one we read. And we just put it out there, and we would leave it on park benches. We'd leave it on bus stops, benches. And I went back to the places where I left them. And I've been doing it off and on for over a year now. Or you're printing off something from the computer that gives people a taste. And I'm not sure if Christine was here, she'd be able to tell us. There's a chapter in, good Lord, I can't remember. She should be here. Christine, are your ears burning?
It's Scott's birthday.
Oh, that's right.
That's why she's not here.
That's right. And well, we'll ask her next week. But we would go distribute these like a chapter out of a book that was really, really a good eye opener. And you know, if you go into the United States, if you go into the FedEx places, they certainly won't make the copies for you because it's copyrighted material. But we passed out chapter 12 of one of the books we read, and it was such a powerful, great jumping in point for somebody who has not been around Neil very much or hasn't been exposed to him at all. And so there's ways we can do this that are not going to break our own banks. And I think we should definitely set something up, possibly like maybe October 12th to give us a little bit of leeway to get this organized. But I think it's a really good idea, and I really appreciate you bringing it up because I would go back to where I left these items to see if they were still there, and it was such a good feeling to see that they weren't there anymore. And I actually was in the parking lot of a park, and I had put the book God's Message to the World, You've Got Me All Wrong, on underneath the windshield wipers. And I happened to still be in that parking lot when this woman came up, and she goes, "Oh my God, somebody was just telling me about this book." And I was close enough that I could hear her. And she goes, "How weird is it that it would show up on my windshield?" You know, it had a note inside that says, "No, this book has not been lost. You have found it," or something like that. Please enjoy. So it's kind of a fun thing to do. And I usually take my granddaughter with me when I go.
I think this is all, I think these are all really great ideas and really great plans. I think we also have to remind ourselves that it starts with each of us, and we have to start standing up and speaking out. And that means, you know, getting a hold of our legislators, getting a hold of our representatives, getting a hold of our state people, our local people, going to city council meetings, going to PTA meetings. I mean, all of these places, running, fulfilling our civic duty by running. One of the things that's bothered me about America my whole life is that there's no requirement for any of us to participate. And I've always thought that we would be a better country if everybody had to participate in some way. Everybody has to volunteer 1 year of their life in, you know, some kind of civic service. And then people will argue, well, it's a free country, so you can't make people do stuff.
Yep.
But, you know, at least we could have the conversation. You know, we could talk about it more. It could be, our civic responsibility could be a more prevalent conversation topic than it is, or than it has been for the last 50, 100 years, you know. And then I think we just, with ourselves, we have to be vigilant, because opportunity to fall into separation as we're dealing with these issues it's right there. It's like a trap. It's waiting for us. And being able to find a way to stay in our hearts, even when we see people doing things that are just clearly what we judge to be inappropriate, somehow being able to stay from a place of love and to have compassion and forgiveness for them, even while they're doing horrible things. That's really when we can achieve that, now we can start making real change. Now we'll start to see real change. But that, for me, that's the real struggle, is to just stay always in that place of love, no matter what's getting said, no matter what's getting done.
And I think you worded that so well, because it is very much like a trap, or like walking a tightrope, and just, which way are you going to, if you lean too far to the left, lean too far to the right, you fall off your tightrope. But the trap analogy is very pertinent, because sometimes you can get so worked up that, you've already been trapped by the mousetrap.
Right.
And again, any of us who have kids, and the older our kids get, the better we get about this, most of us. But I can remember falling into that trap with my kids, and thinking, what am I doing? I'm doing exactly what I'm telling them not to do. And I'm acting like a sibling rather than a parent. And not listening as clearly as I should be, or, and half the time it would happen, I'd already be in the trap, before I realized, now I got to get this thing off my leg, because this is not working. So I think that was really well put. And, and I think around the world, and I was thinking about this early on, before the call, that Sierra Leone is in such a horrific place right now. They're burying people by the hundreds because of the mudslides and the rains. And we have a humanities team coordinator over there. And he wrote a very short, heartfelt note, said, if there's anything you can do, if there's anything you can do, they need medical supplies, they need this, they need that. And they're trying, they're barely out of the problem of the Ebola.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, when I hear things like that, it's heart-wrenching, and you don't want to, because that can be a trap too. I'm not saying we shouldn't feel, but the heart-wrenching stuff can be overwhelming. And at the same time, it's, like, well, what can we do for all these places around the world? But I think from what you were saying, Linda, is if we pay attention to our what's going on in our own communities, and you were talking local things like PTAs and other things that you mentioned, but I think we can start there. It's frustrating that there's so many people in need. So thank you, Sarah. Sarah just wrote in and said, I was obviously tuned in to the needs of the woman under whose windshield wiper you put the book. And my daughter witnessed the power of your effort to spread wisdom and truth, and she will be a happy heir to your goodness. And this was my granddaughter. She's going to be 9 in December. I take her on these things on the weekends during the school year. We go around and we do things like take a little red wagon and ask people to donate food, and then we take it to the homeless shelter. And it's a great way to meet your neighbors. And most adults cannot say no to a kid. They won't say no to a child. And she really liked doing it, my granddaughter. But anyway, I think there are ways we can do things in our community. And we have a community bulletin board, like a neighborhood bulletin board. And it's amazing. Some of the messages I see, most of them are about making positive changes, even to the neighborhood. But everybody's looking out for one another, saying my car got broken into last night. Please make sure I didn't lock my car last night and somebody stole all my CDs. So it's kind of just a little tiny microcosm of looking out for one another. And I think we can do that in so many ways over.
Yeah, and you touched on it at the beginning of the call. When there's a disaster, 99.9% of the people will run towards it, not away from it, because we're humanity. That's what we are. We help each other. And we know that when someone's in trouble, that's us. Primally, our cells know it. They know that that's a part of us over there, drowning or trapped in a car or whatever it might be. And we, without thinking, by nature, run towards people that need help. And we're just in a big thing right now where we're all running towards each other to help each other.
Well, and again, your example of the 20,000 gathering
Marching,
and
yeah.
marching to the Boston Park, and to 40 to 50 people that were going to have their great day of hate. That just, it speaks volumes. I cannot, because I did not know that until I asked you to center us on it. But that is such a good news story that needs to be passed around, because, like you said, we're in the middle of this thing, and we can get hung up in the, oh my God, not another bombing, not another stabbing, not another whatever, not another running people over with a van. And if we can, because I'm going to try to use that as my go-to place when I start feeling that little bit of overwhelm, and just say, okay, nope, go to the Boston Park, go there, just go there. And remember, the good outweighs what we call the bad.
Yeah, Shabana just made a good point too, which kind of touches on what I had said earlier. We were too comfortable. So some people could call Trump a great leader just because he's just gotten us into this horribly uncomfortable place where we're actually standing up and saying what we want.
Yep. And it's so funny because I thought about this, Shabana. I thought about it when George Bush was in office, and I thought, well, he's teaching us what we don't want. Well, I don't think we were listening really well. Because I honestly think, and again, I'm being judgmental, but George W. Bush couldn't hold a candle to some of the ridiculous things that we've seen happen with DJ T. But showing us, it's showing us.
I was listening to, I was watching Stephen Colbert, Nanette.
Mm-hmm.
And after a while, he just made me physically sick, because if you look at how wounded Trump is, to have an ego so fragile that he cannot tolerate any dissent, like how much he hates himself, right?
Yep.
And I was thinking, Stephen Colbert, if you just loved him and pitied him instead of mocking him. That would be more valuable. Like, I didn't realize that my compassion had taken me above the judgment. And I was so grateful because only Donald Trump could have done that. Otherwise, those were good jokes.
I'm sorry to just burst out laughing like that, but there's a bumper sticker here in the United States that says, I get my comedy from Fox Television or Fox News Network. I get my comedy from there, and I get my news from all the comedians because they tell truthful things. But anyways, I get my serious news from like Colbert and others. But having said that, anybody would have a last word they want
Uh,
Yeah, I'd like to send him love. You know, after all of that, he is wounded. The man is as poor as the amount of money he's got.
That's very well
yes,
put.
in spirit, absolutely. In spirit, absolutely. You know, it's interesting. We spent a lot of time this last couple of weeks studying astrological charts and comparing the eclipse to like the transits that it makes in Trump's chart, et cetera, et cetera. And and so for some of you that may not have seen the article I posted or that don't realize it, a lot of the evangelical Christians that are hanging on Trump and believing that he's their answer to the problems, they see it because they see it in his chart, which is kind of weird because like a lot of religious people don't believe in astrology, but then you've got these factions that do. Trump was actually born during a lunar eclipse, which is something that's of interest. And then when you look at his chart with the transits of this solar eclipse and where things are, he's truly being given the roadmap of his chart. Would appear that he's being given the opportunity to become the second coming, literally, absolutely literally, when you look at his chart and what's in it. So this is a huge pivotal opportunity for him. It's a very, very positive influence this solar eclipse is having on him, and it gives him great opportunity to step out of his narcissism and his ego and to move into a place of love. I don't think it's possible because he doesn't have self-love and he doesn't understand how self-love works. And you have to have that before you could do anything else. So it seems quite doubtful, but at the same time, because of the energy, it's just like, you know, we just have to really, like Shabana says, love him, have compassion for him, forgive him his ignorance and his issues, because he's not even aware of them. And maybe if we just all hold him in that light, it's enough to allow him to be touched by that and shift.
That's a very good point, and it's a good point to close the call. And, you know, when we're going around our daily lives, when we're about ready to complain because I got to go put the dishes away, or I got to put them in the dishwasher, or I got to make dinner, I'm going to stop and just shoot love in his direction. You know, it's just what we need to do. And Shabana says she's doing it right now. Okay,
Yeah,
everybody.
Yeah, let's do it now as we go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Together.
Beautiful. Thank you, Shabana.
Yep. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Alton.
Very
Thank
good,
you all.
Alton.
Beautiful.
Yep.
Beautiful, Alton.
Bye.
All
Have a
right,
great
bye-bye,
week.
everybody.
Bye, everybody.